everybody, welcome back to Crazy Talk Analytics. My name is Will, and this is part 2 of Let's Talk About Ranges. And much like part 1, it's going to be a fairly short video. So I'm going to assume that you watched the first part, and I know that's a pretty hefty assumption there, and that we're ready to just jump in and take a look at maybe a few properties or ways that we can access. Well, we've talked a little bit about ways that we can access ranges, but we're always looking on how we can expand on that. So only about maybe at most 16, 18 minutes that I have to go over this today, so I don't want to waste too much of your time. What we did in the last video, I think, was just, referencing the range by accessing the range property of a worksheet or using active cell. And those are all great. And I'm just kind of making excuses while I think of things to say here. So these are good, right? If we use this sheet 2 range A3 value, we're getting the range corresponding in cell A3, passing that alphanumeric sort of address, which also gets returned if you access or print that range's address property. But I find personally that the range value, feeding it that alphanumeric, it's just not really code friendly, because now you're saying, well, I want to go over all of my columns, and now what you're doing is you have to change that 1, 2, 3 to A, B, C, and you're concatenating or building these range strings. So a better way I find to do it is to use the cells property of the sheet. So if we take a look, let's pop this open, and let's say we want cells. So we're using our Object Explorer. We have Excel, and where is it? I feel like there's got to be a better way to. Here we go. Member cells. So I don't class application member cells. So I guess what this is saying is that maybe cells is a property of the range, and I suppose that makes sense. But we can use it directly, right? So I guess that's the part. It doesn't really show up over here. So I guess when you do it, you're probably, when you access a worksheet, you're probably accessing its range. There's a few assumptions that I'm making here. I'm sort of making a few inferences. But let's close this. So we have range demo, and this here is basically value in B9, right? So that's row 9, column 2. B is the second one. If we use cells, so I'm going to say, we're just going to invoke the active worksheet, right? So this is a shortcut that you should understand. It's always important to put full paths or fully define what it is that you want in your code. But if you understand why it is that you're getting what you're getting, because it's an active sheet or because your code is on a specific worksheet, then you can kind of omit that. And I don't think it's a dangerous thing to do, again, as long as you're understanding. So I'm going to say debug.print, and I want to say cells 2 and, 9, 9 and 2. And I get range aliases. Now if I want to go for 10, I can go ahead and do that one as well, and we will get the value cell, and then cell multiple will be 11. And if I go one more to the right, we go 11.3 would be this cell, which would be row 11, column 3, and we'll get a blank value. If I wanted instead to say cells 3 equals hello world, then we'll get that gets inserted into that cell. So we're using the immediate window here to sort of interact instead of running stuff, actually creating proper sub-procedures and things up here in the module, and that's fine. And by using cells, we're bypassing that. We're not saying worksheet 1 or sheet 1 or whatever it is that we're doing, and then accessing that. And then what it would look like, I guess, theoretically, if you wanted to do a full trail, you would do something like sheet 1 dot range dot cells, but I'm not sure if that's, let's try this. Let's see if this even works. 9 2. Well, actually, let's say 9 3. And I'm totally mistyped that. Yeah, so that's not even how cells work. It would be the sheet itself. I don't understand why I didn't see it in the properties. You know what it is? I was looking for a class by itself. That's what the problem was. So it's good to understand what's going on. I was looking for a class for cells, and it's not a class. A cell is another word or way to retrieve a range object, right? So a cell returns a range object. So having that little deviation is not the end of the world. You'll still see it in Excel worksheet. And when we do that, we see the cells as here, just like it is in the range, and we actually see that up here in our Object Explorer. So that's why it's worded this way, and you don't see it under the class because it's not a class. It's a cell returns, and a cell is right over here. Property cells as range, and what this means is you're returning the cell object as a range object, or that's what it is. And then you can click on that and then say, well, class range, it's a member of Excel, and you go back here to Excel, and you're navigating that library hierarchy there. Sorry, it's early. I do have my coffee, but I'm still going to make some mistakes. So that's how you basically, let's close this out. So that's how you can use your row and column format. So instead of saying, B9, I can say 9 2, and it's just that reference. Now, let's just go ahead here and add a new sheet. So let's say that I wanted to, let's actually create, let's use our sandbox up here. So the nice thing about the sandbox code is we can just put anything in there, and then we can sort of execute it easily enough, right? So what I'm going to say is dim, this R, because I wanted to reference the row as, let's go with the long to be safe. That's just a long data type, higher value. So I'm going to say for R equals 1 to, it doesn't matter. We can even say 1000 if we wanted to. Next R. And let's put a C in here. I'm kind of making this whole thing up as I'm going. So now what I'm going to put here is I'm going to say for C equal 1 to, let's not go so hard on this, so high. Let's go to 5. And next C. So this is a row and column iterator. So I like to use R and C for that purpose. So now what I'm going to say is, because I want this specifically to be on this sheet, right? And I have sheet 2 selected. Sheet 2 is actually sheet 4 by name. Sometimes what some people will do is they'll take unnecessary steps, which are good if you don't know the worksheet you're going to end up on. But if we know that we want this sheet 4, we're looking at it in code, there's no need to do anything like set ws equals worksheet and then say, but no, sorry. I do see people do this where they say dim ws as worksheet and then set ws equals worksheets sheet 1, which is the actual worksheet name, and then they'll say ws.cell like that, and that's how they're accessing it. So this would be creating 3 lines of code when you know specifically that you want to access this sheet here, which is sheet 4. So in this case, really all you have to do is just say sheet 4 dot cells, and we want so by using R and C as our as our iterators, we're making it easy. So I want to say equals well, actually, let's just say R times C. Just keep it interesting. We want something a little bit different. R times C. So it's like a weird multiplication table, I guess. And then we can go ahead and run this. And there we go. That was very quick. It was near instant. And we got this instant results. Now, if I wanted to see, well, actually, let's do a comparison on this, right? Because this is one of the things that aggravates me when people, not really aggravates me, it's just when I see people are starting to code, and I was the same way when I was learning myself. They don't understand accessing the objects directly, and they learn through things like the macro recorder or other things, and they look at VBA almost as an extension of Excel, which it's not. So we're not going to get so far again today. I apologize. This will be all about rows and columns, but just to kind of highlight a little bit of this, which I think is kind of important. We're going to do here. We're going to say dim double timer as double, and what this is going to do is it's going to give me a way to track the time, and I might mess this up. Timer equals, I think, is it timer? Let me try this. I don't know if this is right. Debug.print. Now, when I run this, by the way, it's not going to do anything different because it's the same values are going to get entered into the same cells. And I did omit the value here, but something to keep in mind is that we're putting this in here as a value, but then it's sort of changing it to a formula, right? So that's, I don't even, if I wanted to make it a formula directly, well, we're not even going to worry about that. We're just going to leave it this way. I don't want to get too confusing. So you're entering it R times C, and then it's doing a conversion, or so I'm going to print double timer. Let's see if this gives me an error. So it gives me this value. So that's what I thought. Timer returns a specific time. So by saying double timer, and then what I'm going to say over here is we're setting that value. And then at the end of our code, I am going to say double timer equals, or actually, sorry, debug.print timer minus double timer. And that'll give me how long the code took to execute. So we're capturing the time at the start of the code, running our code, and then we're printing the time minus the start time. And we should see something here. So 0.17 seconds, essentially. That's how fast that code was. So one of the things, even if they're not doing the even if they are doing the RC function or property, sometimes what you'll see is people will say sheet 4 dot cells. I guess I'm just repeating this again. Select, and they might think that they have to select every cell. Well, however they're iterating, I'm not really sure. And then they might say selection equals R times C. So we have a 0.17 here on our 0.17 seconds on our time right now. Now let's go ahead and run this. We can't even visually see it right now. Like, well, 8.11 seconds. All right. So just to kind of show this, because it's interesting how it all changed. First, one thing that you'll notice now is we're down here at cell or row 1000. We're physically here because we selected the cells all the way down. And then it took so much longer. So we'll go ahead and let's run this again. And what some people will do, so we're seeing it gets hung up, it looks frozen, and that's because Excel is pushing it through this whole process. Now, if you have something, oh, there, it's done, 8.3 seconds. it's inefficient to always do the cell selection. You don't need to activate, you don't need to select, you don't need to do any of that stuff. Remember, the selection is returning a range. If I come over here and I say selection, look over here, selection, right? It's a window. We don't want that. I think that's probably what we want. So selection here, property selection as an object. So it's kind of vague. It might vary depending on what you have. Worksheet enable selection. Basically, the selection is the range. It's returning the range, and this might not selection change target as range. So basically, the selection is your range. You're just adding extra steps. You're making it more complicated than it needs to be. And then if you wanted to go back to the top of the worksheet, you then have to navigate it to the top of the worksheet. And you'd have to come over here. We got it in under 8 seconds that time. You can see it's not consistent. So I could say cells 1 dot select and then go back up there. There's definitely a lot more I wanted to talk about, but as per usual, time flies. So what I'm going to do here is, again, we're going to change this. So we're going to take this back here and put it over here. And then let's just go ahead and run that one more time and see the difference. So people do things like screen updating equals false, which is a good practice. It's a good practice in general, because sometimes even if you're creating the most efficient code, your screen is still going to get hung up. But it's, in my opinion, look at that. 0.1875. This here double timer is a great little trick to understand how fast your code is executing. You get this visual sort of indication here. Your screen's not getting hung up or locked up, and that we're finding a way to more usefully iterate over our rows and columns versus using something like the alphanumeric column row reference. So I'm gonna have to call that. About to turn into a pumpkin. So thank you for watching. I'm hoping there's some, again, I always hope that there's some value in this, even if it takes a little while, because I'm trying to really explain the concept in a way that you can take it and make it yours and really add value to your projects. So thank you for watching.